This is Olawale Oluwade, and I want to speak briefly what I've titled Six Nigerians, Six Nigerian Leaders, and How They Won the Hearts of the People. Six Nigerian leaders, and how they won the hearts of the people. In the first part of this series, I stated that leaders don't need to induce the people or voters with bribes, rice, money, and all of that, or stay long years in office to win the hearts of the people that they lead. I stated there are certain actions leaders can take in mere days or weeks, which immediately indicates what the leader represents, and when these actions are reinforced repeatedly, becomes the hallmark of greatness, and which engraves them in the hearts of the people they lead. Some of these actions and values the people subliminally desire in their leaders: integrity, humility, selflessness, sacrifice, compassion, discipline, contentment, respect for due process, upholding the rule of law, fairness, equity, and justice. And all of this can be demonstrated in a few days or weeks upon assuming office, and especially when these attributes, are repeated on a consistent basis, thereby winning the trust and loyalty of the people. I have a list of 6 former Nigerian leaders I selected, and I shall show through a brief outline of actions taken in their times in office to corroborate these 4 indicators. But first, here's a brief recap of the 4 indicators or actions I mentioned in the first part. The first and clearest indicator of leadership fitness and suitability are the pronouncements a leader makes upon taking office immediately. Second indicator are the appointments a leader makes to key positions of government. Third indicator is the attitude of a leader in the handling of public finances. Is it deployed in the interest of self, of the person, of the person, or of the people? Fourth indicator, how a leader reacts to fidelity to due process of law, justice, equity, fairness, and all of that. Now, let's get into serious issues now. Nigeria has had a plethora of leaders covering the entire spectrum, from the outstanding, the excellent and outstanding or exceptional, to those who are mere bandits in power. So, it wasn't difficult really, but here's my list of 6 among the plethora that we've had. And I begin in ascending order, meaning I'll start from the list, and move upwards in their ranking. So in 6th place is President Muhammadu Buhari. Whether you like or hate him, either by default or deliberately curated or contrived, President Muhammadu Buhari was a hero adored by tens of millions of devoted northerners, and I might add some others from the other parts of Nigeria too. He wasn't just loved and adored by only northerners. There are some in other parts of Nigeria who loved and adored him, even foreigners, simply because of his, and the reason is because of his perception, as a disciplined, Spartan, and incorruptible leader. I restate, he was a disciplined man who cut an almost spiritual cult-like figure. He had little or no personal scandals in his over 80 years, life. Most of this 80 years he spent in public, life. Muhammadu Buhari became, has been in the public glare for probably only God knows how long, However, sad to say, his 8 years as president, incidentally, perhaps the last 8 or 9 years of his life, has largely dented his perception of incorruptibility, but because of the huge scandals that swirled, his administration, and then the key figures in his administration, but nevertheless, or nonetheless, President Muhammadu Buhari still earned his place on my list. There are tens of millions of northerners who adore President Buhari, who worship him to date, Now, so that's number 6. In 5th place is Mr. Gregory Peter Obi, who though was 2 terms governor of Anambra State, yet it was relatively, unknown, if I may use that word. It was relatively unknown nationally while he was governor. It was not really known nationally like that. It didn't catch the imagination of the public, nationally, until he spoke. He went to speak at the Covenant platform, and the event of the Covenant platform, where he graphically narrated his leadership style, the decisions he took while in office, and the battles he fought and won. The first battle, to defeat the forces of retrogression, corruption, brigandage, and state capture that had held that state down for decades. Recall, Anambra State was the state where a godfather had a sitting governor, Chris Ngige, kidnapped, and Chris Ngige, the sitting governor, had to make frantic calls, telephone calls from his toilet to the powers that be in Abuja to rescue him from those who kidnapped him, a sitting governor. Now, these same dark forces had deployed enormous political and coercive capital to remove Peter Obi from office twice. Yet, through the then justice system, Peter Obi triumphed on all the occasions he was taken to court, up to the Supreme Court. And I stressed then justice system deliberately because today's justice system operates under a thick cloud of integrity deficit, and it is quite telling how low our country has regressed in maybe 12 years or thereabouts. And the second battle Peter Obi had to fight was less of violence, but was at the same time insidious, lethal, corrosive, and extremely destructive. The battle of culture, to change the attitudes, behaviors, and mindsets of civil servants and citizens of Anambra State about state resources and its utilization. Now, when Peter Obi spoke at the Covenant platform event, as the video from that event went viral, both in Nigeria and globally, overnight, inverted commas, overnight, Peter Obi became an instant sensation and assumed iconic figure of the model of leadership Nigerians are desperately yearning for. Peter Obi's greatest contribution to leadership, in Nigeria, are his exemplary personal lifestyle, free of any major scandals to date, uncommon fiscal discipline, which he displayed in the frugal management of Anambra resources, plus initiating an investment and savings culture in a remarkably sharp, contrast to the ungodly squandermania, mindless looting, and indebtedness of his predecessors in Anambra and other governor colleagues of his who plunged their states into huge debts, and squandered resources, like drunken sailors. And Peter Obi also does not draw lifetime pensions. I mean, several governors from several states draw lifetime pensions when they leave office. Peter Obi doesn't, And, this is one reason why Peter Obi is called, Okute Indigbo, because, they removed him several times. He refused to be removed. He served these 8 years, Several landmark cases were formed because of Peter Obi going all the way to the Supreme Court. In fourth place is Alhaji Lateef Jakonde. Not many, millennials and Gen Zs will know this man. He was the former Lagos State governor from 1979 to 1984, civilian governor. He combined great moral fiber, selflessness, sacrificial leadership style with substantial governance drive, which had lasting impact on strategic socio-economic sectors such as, he built hundreds, if not thousands, of primary and secondary schools all over Lagos, thus giving education access to millions of children free of all cost. Quality education to millions of children free of any charge. Likewise, Lateef Jakonde established Lagos State University, Lagos State Polytechnic, Lagos State College of Education. Likewise, he built hundreds of primary healthcare centers, he built general hospitals. Significantly, he built 30,000 units of mass housing estates all over Lagos. And he pioneered intra-city railway, as of 1983 or thereabouts, until a warped federal system stifled its realization, etc., etc. Remarkably, in Lateef Jakonde's almost 4.5 years in office as governor, listen to this, he rode his personal car, a Toyota Carina, if I'm not mistaken. That was what he used throughout his days in office. He rode in his personal car. no purchase of exorbitant exotic SUVs and all of that. And he lived in his personal house throughout his time as Lagos State Governor. Even Peter Obi did not do this, and that's why he ranks above Peter Obi. Till date, Alhaji Lateef Jakonde remains the gold standard of leadership in the history of Lagos State. Okay, Goodluck Jonathan is in third position. He was hectored, harassed, abused, excoriated to no end. He and his wife, Dame Patience Jonathan, were called all sorts of unflattering and derogatory names. Yet, nobody can deny President Goodluck Jonathan his flowers for not shrinking the democratic space, not hounding opposition politicians, not denying political parties' right to exist and function as it is done currently. Importantly, President Goodluck Jonathan did not, castrate the other arms of government, the judiciary and the National Assembly. He did not castrate them or reduce them, to an appendage of his presidency. I mean, imagine a couple of days ago, Senate President Godswill Akpabio went to represent Bola Ahmed Tinubu at a function in Lagos. Just imagine that. The head of one arm of government, going to represent the head of another arm of government. What a shame. And significantly, talking about appointments, Goodluck Jonathan lobbied Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who had served in Obasanjo's cabinet. Cerebral woman, awesome, finance person, finance guru. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan lobbied her intensely. She had gone back to the World Bank. He lobbied her, sent people to lobby her. Even when the likes of Donald Duke, former governor of Cross River State, tried to convince Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala not to take the appointment, she considered it in the interest of a national interest and took the appointment and came back to Nigeria. Goodluck also appointed significantly Professor Atahiru Jega as INEC chair. He never met him, he never knew him from nowhere. And that was the man who conducted the elections in 2015 that saw to Goodluck Jonathan losing the election, which he conceded. Goodluck Jonathan didn't initiate draconian and inhumane policies that stifled the economic space, destroyed the living standards of Nigerians, and which infringed on their fundamental rights. It didn't do any of this. Above all, was his often repeated refrain that his ambition wasn't worth the blood of any Nigerian, and ultimately his coup de grace was conceding defeat even while ballots were still being tallied. Second on the list, President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua. He is the perfect example of my statement that the length of years in service is not as important as what you say or do on a daily basis, and you can attain iconic status in a few weeks. On inauguration day, listen to this, on inauguration day of Yar'Adua as president of Nigeria, he admitted before the world that his victory was procured on an election that was more or less a heist, that the election that brought him into office was more or less stolen. He used, diplomatic phrase, but it was more or less what he was saying, that it was a stolen mandate. Imagine the audacity and the honesty to stand and admit, that more or less that, my benefactor perpetrated electoral crimes. That's the measure of the man, Umaru Yar'Adua. And he didn't just stop by mere admission. He consequently promised and instituted electoral reforms to clean up the entire process through the Justice Ways panel. Then he made public what other things did Umaru Yar'Adua did. He only governed for 3 years. He made public his assets declared at the Code of Conduct Bureau. He made it public. The law didn't say it should be public. He publicized it. He set up the amnesty program for Niger Delta agitators. He didn't go there and bomb the place and arrest them. He made peace, invited them, made peace with them, and ensured, Nigeria continued to produce crude oil, for us to earn foreign exchange. He did that. Biggest of all, he's publicly enunciated, his anti-corruption plan. There's a video where Yar'Adua stood and said, we're going to appoint monitors, young people, to follow public officials, to work with them, monitor their wives' bank accounts, monitor these public officials' assets to make sure if they illegally acquired. He had all of these plans enunciated. But of course, death cut short, all of these lofty, dreams. He was a great president. Only God knows where Nigeria would have been today if Yar'Adua had lived out his term. Now, number one, and of course, you can guess already. If you listen to me, you should know my number one is Chief Obafemi Awolowo, former premier of Southwest Nigeria region from 1954 to 1959, who did unbelievable stuff. But significantly also, from 1970 to 1975, he was appointed as finance minister and vice chairman of the Yakubu Gowon military regime. If I have to catalogue Obafemi Awolowo's accomplishments, I will devote probably 24 hours. And this will just be to outline the outer perimeters of this. Like an elephant, you can only describe a dimension, per time. But I'll speak on one aspect of him here. Beyond being an administrator and manager of men and resources par excellence, to ever govern Southwest region and, Southwest region, and in particular, Nigeria's finance minister, like I said, and vice chairman of Gowon's ESCO. I want to hammer here on Awolowo's intellect. Awolowo was an intellectual colossus. He led and governed, not instinctively, not reactionary, but intentionally, deliberately, and proactively. He was a philosopher king, the only philosopher king we have had in the history of this country. He was a consummate leader and tactician. Obafemi Awolowo is the original master strategist. He was a visionary genius with extraordinary mental bandwidth, and the evidence abounds. I don't need to rehash any of this. Obafemi Awolowo once said, I am here, I quote, I am here burning the midnight oil while my colleagues are frolicking with women of easy virtues, end of quote. Now, I haven't said all of this. I repeat here what I said before in the first video. The current President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, his allies and party, APC, are busy destabilizing opposition parties and distributing rice and food and money to Nigerians to bribe them. Simply because in 3 years, precious resources, enormous powers of the presidency, and precious resources in time, money, and countless lives have been wasted on frivolities, misplaced priorities, and self-promoting agendas. Worse of all, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's government, by all objective metrics and standards, ranks as one of the top 3 most fiscally reckless and indisciplined governments in Nigeria's 65 years history. I've never seen, in 3 years, this government is one of the top 3 most fiscally, reckless and indisciplined. The way money is being thrown around like confetti on inanities, on frivolities, while the key issues that matter have been denied of funds. So I say, as I conclude, President Tinubu does not deserve to be re-elected president in 2027. It will be a sacrilege to repeat the error Nigeria made in 2023. Thank you for listening, and bye for now.